night New York thought it was over. The Knicks didn't just walk into Madison Square Garden for Game 3 expecting a win. New York walked in expecting a funeral. A funeral for the Spurs' confidence. A funeral for San Antonio's miracle season. A funeral for the idea that a two-year-old Victor Wembanyama could survive the most ruthless stage in basketball with an entire city screaming for his collapse. The series was supposed to be tilting toward New York. The Knicks had already stolen both games in San Antonio. They were up 2-0 inches the NBA Finals. They had Madison Square Garden shaking like it was 1,999 all over again. Blue and orange were everywhere. The city wasn't just watching basketball. It was preparing for history, and that was the dangerous part. Because when a city starts celebrating too early, sometimes the one player everybody is trying to bury walks into the building with nothing left to lose. Victor Wembanyama had heard the noise. He had felt the weight. Game 2 was still fresh. The late turnover, the missed shot, the viral clips, the questions. The whispers that maybe the moment was too big, maybe the finals had arrived too early, maybe the young Spurs had finally hit the wall. Every young team eventually hits, but Wembanyama did not look like a kid carrying shame when Game 3 began. He looked like someone who had spent 2 nights replaying every mistake in his head and had decided that Madison Square Garden was going to pay for it. San Antonio came out fast, sharp, almost angry. The Spurs opened the game like they understood one brutal truth. If they fell behind 3-0, the dream was basically dead. No team in NBA Finals history had ever climbed out of that hole. The Knicks knew it, the fans knew it, every player in that building knew it. That is why this was not just Game 3. This was survival. And then Wembanyama started flying above the rim, blocking shots, controlling space, and changing the mood of the entire arena. Stephon Castle played with the calm of someone who had been built for pressure. De'Aaron Fox waited for the exact moment to put his fingerprints on the game. And slowly, the night New York thought would become a celebration started turning into something much darker. A warning, because the Spurs were young, but they were not scared. They were inexperienced, but they were not broken. They were down 2-0, but they were not dead. And by the time the fourth quarter arrived, Madison Square Garden was no longer watching a coronation. It was watching Victor Wembanyama grow up in real time, right in front of the loudest crowd in basketball. So before we go deeper into how the Spurs shocked New York, how Wembanyama answered every critic, and how this finals series suddenly became dangerous again, tell me this: where are you watching from right now? If you believe the Knicks still control this series, press 1-inch the comment. If you believe Wembanyama just changed everything, press 2. And if you love NBA stories like this, subscribe now. Because this finals is no longer just a series. It is becoming a war for the future of the league. The mistake that haunted Wembanyama. Before Victor Wembanyama silenced Madison Square Garden, he had to survive the loudest noise of all. The noise inside his own head. Game 2 had not ended like a normal loss. It ended with the kind of mistake that follows a young superstar into the locker room, onto the team bus, into his phone, into every sports debate show in America. One turnover, one missed jumper, one final possession that made the basketball world stop and ask the question nobody wanted to say out loud. Was Victor Wembanyama ready for this? The Knicks had won Game 2 by the thinnest possible margin, 105-104. And that number alone made the loss feel cruel. San Antonio had fought back. They had pushed, they had nearly stolen the game back. Wembanyama had helped fuel a late Spurs surge, and for a moment, it looked like the young giant was about to rescue his team from disaster. Then everything flipped. The turnover came, the shot did not fall, New York escaped, and suddenly, the most talented young player in the world became the face of San Antonio's heartbreak. That is what makes the NBA Finals different. In the regular season, a mistake can disappear by the next night. In the finals, it becomes a headline, it becomes a clip, it becomes a debate, it becomes proof for everyone who already doubted you. And Wembanyama had plenty of doubters waiting. Some said the Spurs were too young, some said the final stage was too bright. Some said the Knicks had found the formula. Hit Wembanyama with physical defense, push him off his spots, make him think, make him rush, make him carry the burden of every possession until the pressure finally bent him. For 2 games, New York made that plan look real. Karl-Anthony Towns battled him with size. The Knicks sent bodies into his driving lanes. Brunson kept New York calm late. The Garden was waiting. The basketball world was waiting. And after Game 2, the story was simple. The Knicks had the lead, the Spurs had the questions, and Wembanyama had the scar. But scars can do 2 things. They can make a player shrink, or they can sharpen him. That was the difference in Game 3. Wembanyama did not come into New York trying to erase the mistake by pretending it never happened. He played like someone who remembered every second of it, every careless moment, every missed chance, every camera angle of that late collapse. He carried it, but he did not let it crush him. That is when young stars become danger. Not when everything is easy. Not when every shot falls. Not when the crowd loves them. They become dangerous when the league finally hits them in the mouth, and they come back colder, calmer, and more prepared than before. Against New York, Wembanyama was not just chasing points, he was chasing control. He slowed the game down, he picked his spots, he attacked without forcing. He protected the rim like he wanted every Knick to feel his presence before they even thought about shooting. And maybe the most important part was this: he only turned the ball over once. After the entire basketball world had spent 2 days replaying his late Game 2 mistake, Wembanyama walked into the most hostile arena in America, played the biggest game of his young career, and gave New York almost nothing to use against him. That is not talent, that is growth. The Spurs needed his points, yes. They needed his blocks, they needed his rebounds. But more than anything, they needed proof that their franchise player could take the worst moment of his finals life and turn it into fuel before the series slipped away forever. And he did. By the time Game 3 reached the fourth quarter, the old mistake was no longer the story. The new story was much scarier for New York. Victor Wembanyama had learned fast. And if a two-year-old superstar can learn this quickly on the NBA's biggest stage, then the Knicks were not just dealing with a great player, they were dealing with a problem that could get worse every single night. Madison Square Garden became a trap. Madison Square Garden sounded like it had already chosen the ending. New York was up 2-0. The Knicks were finally back home in the finals. The city was roaring. The crowd was electric. And everyone believed Game 3 would be the night San Antonio's dream started to collapse. A 3-0 lead in the NBA Finals is almost a death sentence. No team had ever escaped it. So the Knicks were not just trying to win. They were trying to bury the Spurs before they could believe again. But that pressure cut both ways. The Spurs walked into MSG with nothing to lose, while the Knicks carried the weight of an entire city, expecting them to finish the job. Every chant made the building louder, but it also made every New York miss feel heavier. San Antonio started sharp. Wembanyama attacked early. Stephon Castle stayed calm. The Spurs did not look scared of the stage. They looked focused. Then the Knicks punched back. Jalen Brunson pushed the tempo, the crowd exploded, and New York's second quarter run made it feel like the Garden was taking control again. But the Spurs never broke. That was the real warning. Every time New York surged, San Antonio answered. Every time MSG got louder, Wembanyama looked calmer. By the fourth quarter, the arena was no longer celebrating. It was nervous. The Knicks thought Madison Square Garden would trap the Spurs. Instead, the pressure started trapping New York. And by the end of the night, one terrifying thought was hanging over the entire building. Maybe San Antonio had not come to survive. Maybe they had come to wake up. The young Spurs refused to break. San Antonio threw the first punch. Wembanyama came out aggressive, attacking the rim, blocking shots, and forcing New York to react. For a moment, Madison Square Garden lost its voice. The Spurs looked sharp, focused, and nothing like a team about to collapse. But the Knicks answered hard. Brunson slowed the game down, New York's defense tightened, and the Garden exploded again. The Spurs' early lead disappeared, and suddenly Game 3 looked like it was slipping back into the Knicks' hand. This was the moment San Antonio was supposed to panic. They were young. They were down 0-2. They were on the road, surrounded by a city waiting to celebrate their downfall. But they did not break. Stephon Castle stayed calm. Wembanyama kept attacking. De'Aaron Fox controlled the tempo when the game got messy. The Spurs made mistakes, but they never looked scared. That was the warning sign for New York. The Knicks had shaken San Antonio, but they had not shattered them. And once the Spurs realized they could survive the Garden's loudest storm, they started playing with belief again. By the final stretch, San Antonio no longer looked like a team fighting to stay alive. They looked like a team ready to steal the series back. Wembanyama took over the fourth quarter. The fourth quarter did not feel like basketball anymore. It felt like a test. For the Knicks, it was a chance to take a 3-0 lead and put one hand on the championship. For the Spurs, it was the difference between being alive and being almost finished. And that was when Victor Wembanyama changed the entire temperature of the series. He did not rush. He did not force the moment. He controlled it. Every possession started to feel heavier for New York because Wembanyama was touching every part of the game. If the Knicks drove inside, he was waiting near the rim. If they gave him space, he punished them. If they sent pressure, he made the right pass. He was not just scoring, he was making the Garden feel smaller. This was the version of Wembanyama San Antonio needed. Not just the highlight machine. Not just the 7'4" alien throwing down lobs and blocking shots into the crowd. They needed a leader. They needed someone who could take the pain from Game 2 and turn it into calm decision-making in Game 3. And that is exactly what he did. He finished with 32 points, but the number that mattered most was how he got them. 13 came in the fourth quarter when every possession felt like it could decide the series. He was no longer reacting to the finals. He was shaping them. New York had spent 2 games trying to make him uncomfortable. They pushed him, crowded him, forced him into tough catches, and made him feel every inch of finals pressure. But in Game 3, especially late, Wembanyama looked like he had solved something. He played with patience. He played with force. He played like a star who understood that the biggest answer is not talking back. It is making the other team run out of solutions. Even his leadership changed the mood. When a teammate missed, he encouraged him. When the game tightened, he stayed composed. When the crowd tried to shake him, he looked almost peaceful. That is terrifying for the Knicks, because emotional young stars can be attacked. Frustrated young stars can be rushed. But a calm Wembanyama in the fourth quarter is a different kind of problem. By the final minutes, Madison Square Garden was still loud, but the confidence had changed sides. The Knicks were the team searching, the Spurs were the team executing. And Wembanyama was standing in the middle of it all, turning a must-win road game into the first true statement of his finals career. Game 2 made people question him. Game 3 made them fear what he becomes after being questioned. Castle and Fox delivered the kill shots. Wembanyama changed the game, but Stephon, Castle, and De'Aaron Fox helped finish it. That is what made Game 3 so dangerous for New York. The Knicks were not losing to one player, they were losing to a Spurs team that suddenly looked connected, fearless, and ready for the moment. Castle was the surprise that should not have been a surprise anymore. He had already played big games before, he had already felt pressure in this building, and when Madison Square Garden tried to swallow him, he did not blink. Late in the fourth quarter, with the shot clock dying and the Knicks trying to claw their way back, Castle rose up and hit the kind of three-pointer that changes the sound of an arena. 1 second, MSG was screaming. The next second, it was stunned. That shot gave San Antonio breathing room. More importantly, it told New York something painful. Wembanyama was not alone. If the Knicks loaded up on him, Castle could punish them. If they relaxed for even one possession, the Spurs had another young player calm enough to break their hearts. And then came De'Aaron Fox. Fox did not need to dominate the box score to dominate the ending. His job was control. His job was timing. His job was making sure the Spurs did not waste the moment Wembanyama had created. With New York still alive, Fox stepped back and buried the jumper that felt like a door closing. Not loud, not flashy, just cold. That was the difference between a young team and a young team with the right veteran hand. Fox gave San Antonio balance, Castle gave them courage, Wembanyama gave them power. Together, they gave the Knicks a problem that could not be solved with crowd noise. The final score said Spurs 115, Knicks 111. But the real message was bigger than 4 points. San Antonio had walked into New York down 0-2 and left with belief. Castle proved the stage was not too bright. Fox proved the moment was not too chaotic, and Wembanyama proved the future might be arriving faster than anyone expected. For the Knicks, this was supposed to be the night they tightened their grip on the finals. Instead, Castle and Fox helped pry the series back open. NBA legends reacted, and the tone changed. Before Game 3, the conversation around the Spurs was full of doubt. Too young, too inexperienced, too dependent on Wembanyama, too fragile after losing the first 2 games at home. But after San Antonio walked into Madison Square Garden and beat the Knicks 115-111, the tone around the league changed fast. This was not just fans overreacting online. This was NBA people watching closely. Shaquille O'Neal, Charles Barkley, Draymond Green, Kenny Smith, Ernie Johnson, Reggie Miller, and players across the league all understood what they had just seen. The Spurs had not stolen a lucky game. They had answered a finals-level crisis. Draymond Green had already warned people that playoff basketball forces young teams to grow quickly. Every round changes you, every hostile arena teaches you something, every mistake either exposes you or builds you, and after 3 rounds of surviving the Western Conference, San Antonio no longer looked like a young team just happy to be there. They looked tested. Charles Barkley had praised the Knicks earlier in the series, especially the toughness of Karl Anthony Towns and the clutch control of Jalen Brunson. But after Game 3, even the loudest Knicks praise had to make room for Wembanyama, because this was the kind of performance that shifts reputations. 32 points, 8 rebounds, 6 assists, 3 blocks, 13 points in the fourth quarter, only 1 turnover after the mistake that haunted him in Game 2. That is not just a stat line. That is a message. Shaq understood the weight of it. Big men are judged differently in the final. They are expected to dominate, protect the rim, handle contact, absorb criticism, and still produce when the game slows down. Wembanyama did all of that on the road. In New York, with his season hanging over the edge, Reggie Miller knew what Madison Square Garden can do to a player. He knows better than almost anyone how loud that building gets when Knicks fans believe blood is in the water. So when Wembanyama and Castle stayed composed through that storm, it meant something. The league noticed, and the scariest part for New York was not just that Wembanyama played great, it was that he looked like he was learning in real time. The player who made the late mistake in Game 2 was not the same player closing Game 3. He was calmer, sharper, more patient, and more dangerous. That is why the conversation changed. Before Game 3, people asked whether the Spurs were ready for the finals. After Game 3, people started asking whether the Knicks had just let San Antonio back into the series too soon. The Spurs were still down 2-1. New York still had control on paper. But basketball is not played on paper. It is played through rhythm, pressure, fear, and belief. And after Game 3, belief no longer belonged only to the Knicks. It belonged to Wembanyama. It belonged to Castle. It belonged to a Spurs team that suddenly had the entire NBA wondering if the future had arrived ahead of schedule. New York's hidden collapse. The Knicks did not lose Game 3 because they were soft. They lost because in the most important moments of the night, their control disappeared. That is the part New York fans do not want to hear. The Knicks still had the series lead. They still had Jalen Brunson. They still had Madison Square Garden behind them. They still had every reason to believe they were the better team. But late in Game 3, the details started betraying that. Brunson fought, but San Antonio made every possession harder. He had to create through length, pressure, and bodies waiting in the lane. The Knicks needed clean execution around him, but instead, the offense tightened. The ball stuck. The rhythm faded. The shots got rushed. And then came the number that explained the pain. 0 for 9 from 3 in the fourth quarter. In a finals game at home, with a chance to take a 3-0 lead, New York went completely cold from deep when it mattered most. That is not just a bad shooting stretch. That is the kind of stretch that changes a series emotional. Karl-Anthony Towns had been a major part of New York's physical plan against Wembanyama, but Game 3 flipped that matchup. Wembanyama looked more comfortable, Towns looked less effective. The Knicks had spent 2 games making Victor feel the pressure, but now Victor was making them feel his growth. Josh Hart battled like a warrior. He crashed the glass, defended, fought for extra possessions, and gave New York the kind of effort every championship team needs. But effort alone could not cover the cracks. The Knicks did not collapse all at once, they cracked slowly. A missed 3, a forced possession, a late defensive breakdown, a Castle dagger, a Fox jumper, a Wembanyama answer. Each moment took a little more air out of the building. That is why Game 3 was dangerous for New York. They did not get embarrassed. They did not get blown out. They were right there, and still, they lost. Those are the losses that follow a team into the next game. Because now the Knicks know the Spurs can beat them in New York. They know Wembanyama can solve their physicality. They know Castle is not scared. They know Fox can close. New York still leads 2-1. But after Game 3, the Knicks no longer feel untouchable. And in the NBA Finals, once doubt gets inside the room, it does not leave quiet. The noise around Game 3 made it bigger than basketball. Game 3 was never just about basketball. Not in New York, not at Madison Square Garden, not with the Knicks 2 wins away from a championship dream the city had been chasing for decades, but this night had even more noise than usual. Outside the arena, security was tighter. Fans were frustrated. The energy around the building felt chaotic before the ball was even tipped. The appearance of Donald Trump turned the night into a national headline, adding political tension to an already explosive NBA Finals atmosphere. For some fans, it was annoying. For others, it was distracting. For the players, it was just one more layer of pressure on a night that already had too much of it. Long lines, heavy security, cameras everywhere, a city buzzing, a crowd ready to erupt, a final series hanging in the balance. That was the environment San Antonio had to walk into. And that is what made the Spurs win even more impressive. Because young teams are not only tested by the scoreboard, they are tested by everything around the scoreboard. The noise, the waiting, the crowd, the headlines, the delays, the feeling that the entire night belongs to somebody else before the game even starts. New York wanted Game 3 to feel like a celebration. The Spurs turned it into a fight. De'Aaron Fox even admitted that the extra security made things inconvenient. But once the game started, San Antonio did what mature teams do. They separated distraction from execution. That is not easy. A young roster can lose focus in that kind of environment. They can start rushing. They can let the moment feel too big. They can turn one bad possession into 3 bad minutes, but the Spurs stayed locked in. Wembanyama looked calm. Castle looked composed. Fox looked in control. Coach Mitch Johnson kept the message simple. Play closer to the team's identity, trust the work, and do not let the outside noise decide the game. That became the quiet difference. While New York carried the weight of the city, San Antonio carried only the possession in front of them. While the building screamed for history, the Spurs played like they were blocking out everything except the next stop, the next pass, the next shot. By the end of the night, Game 3 had become more than a road win. It was proof that the Spurs could handle the Garden, proof that Wembanyama could respond to failure, proof that Castle could hit big shots under pressure, proof that Fox could close when the game got tight, and proof that the loudest night of the finals did not belong to the loudest team. It belonged to the team that stayed calm inside the chaos. What this win really means: Game 3 did not make the Spurs the favorite, but it made them dangerous again. That is the real meaning of San Antonio's 115-111 win at Madison Square Garden. The Knicks still lead the series 2-1. New York still has Jalen Brunson, home court energy, playoff toughness, and the confidence of a team that already proved it can beat San Antonio twice. But after Game 3, the finals no longer feel one-sided, because the Spurs did something every championship-level team has to do at some point. They responded. They responded to humiliation. They responded to pressure. They responded to a 0-2 hole. They responded to a hostile city, a loud arena, a brutal history, and the fear that one more loss could basically end their season. And at the center of that response was Victor Wembanyama. His lesson was simple but powerful. Greatness is not about never making mistakes. Greatness is about what happens after the mistake. Game 2 gave him pain. Game 3 showed his maturity. He did not run from the pressure. He walked into it, studied it, and used it. That is what separates talent from leadership. Stephon Castle showed another lesson. Young players do not have to wait years to become fearless. Sometimes the moment arrives early, and the only choice is to meet it with calm eyes. His clutch shot was not just a basket. It was a message that San Antonio's future has more than one face. De'Aaron Fox showed the value of veteran timing. In the finals, not every big play is loud. Sometimes the biggest play is the quiet jumper that ends hope. Sometimes leadership is not emotional, it is precise. For the Knicks, the lesson is just as clear. They cannot assume the series will finish itself. They cannot depend only on the crowd, history, or early momentum. Championship teams close windows before young teams learn how to climb through them, and the Spurs just climbed through one. But beyond the strategy, there is something more human here. Pressure can embarrass you. It can expose you. It can make the world question who you really are. But pressure can also teach you. It can sharpen you. It can show you that one bad night does not define your story unless you let it. That is why Game 3 mattered. Not because the Spurs completed the comeback. They have not. Not because the Knicks lost control of the series. They still lead. It matters because belief changed sides for one night. And in the NBA Finals, belief can be the first crack in the wall. Now, Game 4 becomes enormous. If New York wins, the Knicks take control again. If San Antonio wins, this series becomes a completely different animal. The pressure shifts, the questions grow louder, and suddenly, the young Spurs are not chasing survival anymore. They are chasing history. So now, I want to hear from you. If you think the Knicks will bounce back and win the finals, comment 1. If you think Wembanyama and the Spurs are about to shock the world, comment 2. If you believe Game 3 was the turning point of the entire series, comment 3. And if you enjoyed this breakdown, subscribe to the channel, hit the like button, and share this video with another real NBA fan. Because this finals is not just about one trophy anymore, it is about pressure, growth, belief, and the future of basketball arriving faster than anyone expected.